Welcome to the Shower Epiphanies podcast, where we explore your hidden thoughts and desires, revealing your greatest drop the mic moments. Now, here's your host, Art Costello.
Welcome to the Shower Epiphanies podcast. Today, I am honored to have Maura Sweeney as my guest. She's a New Jersey girl where I was born up, but she's also known as the ambassador of happiness. She's an advocate for all and an energetic voice for a better world. She's an author, international speaker, frequent media guest, and creator of an e-course on emotional intelligence. Maura helps individuals find their voice, entrepreneurs develop their brand, and leaders emerge into their most authentic, influential, and highest version of themselves. Thank you, Maura. I can't wait to get into this conversation. I can tell you already, we've had a little bit of pre-stuff, but her and I are going to hit it off, and we're going to have a lot of fun with this. So go ahead, tell us your story.
Well, first of all, Art, I want to say thanks for having me on. And you're right, before we went live here, we were already both realizing we came from New Jersey. We both have Italian backgrounds, Costello. My maternal family was Corella. And there was some other Cadettis in there. And I thought, who knows, we might have relatives that have met somewhere in Jersey. But my background, to answer your question, is in New Jersey. I grew up being able to see Manhattan right on the Jersey side of the Hudson River. And oddly enough, as much as I could see the skyline of what would be considered, the Empire City, the center of the earth, and so much going on, I always felt as a child that I was living in a very small place. It was 1 square mile. Oftentimes, this is my perspective, in town felt like everything that happened in Lyndhurst. And if it didn't happen in Lyndhurst, it's not important. And yet I was always a dreamer. Something in me, my earliest recollections was lying on the grass. I loved being outside. I must have loved the scent of spring and freshly mowed grass, but I would stare up at the clouds. But most importantly, I would look at airplanes. And now this is back in the day, early 60s. Not everybody flew. And all I could think about is, where are the airplanes going? And I had all of these imaginary pictures in my head of people who flew on airplanes being people from foreign countries. So I was thinking about Chinese people, the different hats. I could remember thinking about the people in Holland that wore wooden shoes. I was thinking about people in Africa in their African garbs. And I wanted so much to literally get up in the atmosphere and to fly among the clouds, but mostly to connect with all of these different kinds of people around the world who live differently, dress differently, spoke differently, everything. And yet I used to view them as if they were my unmet relatives. So those were my expectations, going out, meeting the world, having fun, being at wonderful places of happiness, and I would say brotherly love. And yet the reality, as I perceived it as a child, was very much the opposite, because I was this free spirit. I wanted to go out and play with friends and dance. And yet I was very groomed, controlled, almost contrived as a child. Not that any of it is bad, but in some ways, for the person I was, and let's say the expectations I had in life, they were running contrary. That was a great experience I had of, looking up in the sky. The other fun experiences, early 1960s, growing up in a cul-de-sac with kids all playing right in front of our house, and they were all around the same age. To me, it was fun. But my mother used to have my brother and me, as she told it. I didn't realize what time was back then. But in the summertime, 4:30 in the afternoon, I have memories of being at our front door, looking through the screen and seeing right outside my house on the cul-de-sac, all of my friends playing. It was tag at the time. Remember, people would play tag and hide and seek? And I wanted to be out there with my friends, but there was this screen door separating me from my friends, and I was wearing my pajamas, in particular, my baby doll pajamas. And here I was crying on the inside of the screen, wanting to be outside, and yet being indoors, sun is shining, kids are laughing, and I felt really confined and unhappy. So I spent several of my early years in that place where I felt like I was not able to be free to do the things I wanted. And I'll give you another funny thing from my background. And again, you'll appreciate it because we're sort of from the same era.
The need to have closure in any given situation is sheer human nature. And when it comes to romantic relationships, this desire skyrockets. Has your previously failed relationship left you in immense pain? It's not uncommon for people to shy away from a new relationship after their first one fails miserably. The fear of the unknown makes them hide in a shell to prevent any future heartbreak. Relatable? Despite wanting to love and be loved, you can't take the plunge if your mind and heart are still locked somewhere in the past. Maybe you aren't aware of the power of releasing the past, or perhaps you don't know how to do it. Art Costello in his online course teaches the art of moving on from bad places to happier, more stable ones. This course can change your life for good, helping you beat all kinds of negativity on the road to eternal bliss. Sign up now before the gloominess gets the better of you at expectationacademy.com.
One morning, probably a Saturday, my mother was ironing in the rec room. And as she's doing it, she's got something on TV. And I see a microphone and a handsome man and all these high school kids, teenagers, and they're moving to music, and then they're talking about the music. And here I'm maybe 2-3 years old, and I said to her, "Mommy, what is that?" And she said, "They're dancing." And I said to her, "That's what I want to do. I want to dance." Now you could see we're looking at each other on this Zoom call, and I'm smiling and I'm excited. And all I could see was poetry in motion and fun and frivolity, and everything about it was the party and the enlivenment. And yet my mother did take me, to her credit, for one dance class, and I remember it vividly. 2.5 years old, I spent the whole time looking in the big giant mirrors, making funny faces. Well, half hour later, I didn't learn how to dance. She took me by the hand. We went home, never had another dance class, but she enrolled me in piano classes. So here I am once again in the house studying classical piano. We have this is interesting, it was a big bay window at the time in the front of our house, also overlooking the kids playing in the neighborhood. And it's like, here I am indoors doing what I don't want to do, and I want to be outside playing, and I'm learning piano. And so that was kind of my early life. And just to quickly move forward, I was just always brought up in a specific way with certain expectations. And those expectations were that I would grow up to be very much geared to be a lady in nice places, very smart, and I was supposed to be a lawyer like my grandfather, who had just passed away by the time I was 5.5. So it was very much a lifestyle of being groomed. It all sounded good, but within me, it was like, this isn't me. I want to go out and do my own thing. So there you go. That's a good stopping place. Why don't you ask me the next question?
First of all, I want to address this. Lyndhurst, New Jersey is where the blimp blew up in 1939.
Close, Lakehurst. People always say that.
Yeah, that's okay.
Lakehurst was more like Central Jersey. We were literally like 10 minutes, 15 minutes outside of Manhattan, but that big Lakehurst, Central Jersey.
Yeah. My mom was in Lakehurst that day when it happened. My mother saw it. So, and she always told us about it, so that was a big deal around our household.
A tragedy. And you know what? There's a place you could actually go there. When I've returned to Jersey, I was never able to get in, but on a future trip, I want to go because they have an area that's sort of like dedicated to the event. That was an epic.
Yeah. I think it was the big first blimp tragedy that was ever in the world. But anyway, the second thing that I want to address is, and don't fall off your chair when I tell you this, I'm not Italian.
Get out with a name like Costello? What are you?
Irish.
Seriously. Although not to say you look Italian, you're Irish? All right. My growing up name, Maura Haggerty. Couldn't get much more Irish than that. And I used to think, this is not my name. This doesn't feel like me. And I really felt more like Latin. Interesting, isn't it? So how about Art Costello is Irish?
Yeah, in Northern Ireland, there's a whole clan of Costellos and all that. Actually, John Costello, I believe in the 50s, was the premier of Ireland at the time. So it's always funny. My dad grew up in Brooklyn, was born in Brooklyn. And I've got an interesting story about it. When I was 9, my parents moved us from New Jersey to upstate New York, and we moved to a very rural area. We were shunned. People didn't want anything to do with us. It really started my whole journey in life of really kind of understanding myself because I became very reflective. But anyway, to make this story short, because I want to hear about you, not me. Anyway, when we moved up there, I started school and everything was always I only had 3 friends in high school. And that was it. Everybody else kind of just stayed away. And my 3 buddies were all kind of, I don't want to say same circumstance, but my best friend, his parents were very, very elderly. So he was kind of a loner. My other friend, his mom was single. So we were kind of all outsiders. And when I went to my 50th reunion a few years back, one of the guys came up to me and he said, and my class only had 20 people in it. So when we went, there was, I don't know, maybe 15 of us still there. And I was still off to the side. And I'm so gregarious and outgoing, but I noticed it was everybody else was kind of amongst themselves. And here I am, and at the food table, of course. But anyway, one of the guys came over and he said, "Hey, Art," he said, "did you ever wonder why no one ever associated with you and stuff?" And I said, "No." Well, I said, I knew it happened, but I'd never thought about it because I don't think about the past much. But anyway, he said, because we moved there in 1959. So he said, when you moved here, we were told that your parents were running from the mafia and that you were in hiding and that we were forbidden to hang around with you for fear that we would be caught up in a retribution thing or kidnapped or
compromised or whatever.
Yeah.
Because of the Costello name. Wasn't there a real famous mafia guy who's a Costello?
Frank Costello was very, very big. And at the time, he had just been murdered.
So it was the news.
And my dad was born in Brooklyn. So, I mean, it was...
It fit.
It was all part of it. So,
anyway. What an epiphany 50 years later to learn that, right?
Yeah. So...
what's interesting? Thank you. That's really curious to share. And, I'm probably jumping around. I didn't go backwards, but this was interesting. If you did your research on my background, you may know that although I grew up with an Irish name and I married a guy with an Irish name, when we both attended an Irish Catholic Boston college, my husband ended up getting unwelcomely enmeshed with the Goodfellas guy who was Henry Hill of Goodfellas fame. And knowing that my husband was the point guard, he figured he could convince my husband through whatever means to throw basketball games or shave them, whatever. Now this is my little connection with you. This happened like in 1979, and my husband his life was threatened. There were 8 people murdered that year, including a young man who stayed with my husband in his dorm for a few days. And that was part of the whole threatening thing. So we graduate 1981. My husband testifies in New York City, in Brooklyn. Yeah, I think it was. It was absolutely Brooklyn, against this same mafia family that was trying to buy Boston College basketball. He's part of a cover story in Sports Illustrated. And what's so amazing is that he was never charged with anything. And this is something he didn't want to do. And he actually did want to get up there and speak about what happened. And as it turns out, these people were found guilty. But the amazing thing was, always, because he was not allowed to speak to the press. 30 years later, 25 years later, I am out here down in Florida. We've moved to Florida like in 1983 when he had a wonderful management experience he was offered at a major corporation. And we were thrilled to move to Florida. It was where I always wanted to live. And I'm having dinner years later, like decades later, with one of the women I had hired to work in this corporate firm that I was working for. She had had her second glass of wine and she said, Maura, my husband used to play basketball several years ago with your husband, Jimmy. And she said he came home one day and said, you're working for Maura Sweeney and she's married to Jim Sweeney. They're mafia people. And we both laughed about it because isn't it interesting? Talk about epiphanies. I just laughed because you never know. Sometimes people will hear something, or this is a big lesson. You want to talk about epiphanies that I learned at the age of 23, when my husband was going to be a witness to testify, is that the power of the media, the power of the press, the power of even prosecutors to turn and twist a tale. And because of that, Art, I learned, and I probably was this way even prior, but I learned never to assume anything of anyone else without sufficient amounts of information, corroboration. And the other thing too, I never wanted to be a person that would presume evil or evil intentions of another person. And you could say that was an epiphany. I would say that was a life experience. I learned the power of the pen. I learned the power of power. And I also learned even that at some levels, people will use their position in ways rather than helping, but sometimes they are self-serving ways and they could be corruptive. And I think that's probably one reason why years later, I do speak a lot on sustainable leadership and what is it to be a person of integrity and a leader who's willing to be courageous enough to do the right thing, even when it may cost you at some level. So see, we could get very deep.
Yeah. But you know where that all resides in how you expect. In my book, Expectation Therapy, it's based on me, how I healed myself as a child after moving up to the farm and being left alone and not having very many friends and losing the thing that was most dear to me, which was baseball. But how we expect is so instrumental in how we perceive. And it has a lot. I write a lot about emotional intelligence in my book, because emotional intelligence is very, very important to how you learn to expect. Because if you cannot define your emotions, you will entangle them in your expectations. So you've got to have the intermeshing of emotional intelligence with your expectations to really have the perspective of what you want and how you want to grow. It's very intriguing when you get into it, and I write about it a lot in my book, and I can see the look on your face.
No, it's very interesting because something, you mentioned that you were reflective as a child. So was I.
Mm-hmm.
I never read your book, but I have checked into your podcast. We're connected now on LinkedIn, and I listened to a few things you said previously. With me, I also was a very reflective person. As a young person, I spent a lot of time indoors. My mother was agoraphobic. I didn't realize that. So she was indoors, and then she would try to keep me indoors. And I spent a lot of time around older people. Our great-grandmother passed away in her home. And so I would listen to a lot, but I was very reflective, and I'll tell you why. And maybe this is a similarity between the two of us. I've never taken a class on psychology. I've never gone to a therapist for my brain, my mind, my thoughts, my emotions. I like to tell people as a joke, I went through life without Novocaine. So that, what I always would say, even as a young person, I would say I was spiritually inclined in that I would look at the world and I knew that there was a better life to be lived. I knew that there was something higher, better, a better form of life than maybe the common form of life that was in front of me. So I bring this up to say that feeling isolated, oftentimes kind of separated. Our town was more working class, blue collar, and yet my family was more educated and more affluent, with my grandfather being an attorney and my father at one point worked on Wall Street. And I never felt like I kind of fit in. But when I was about 9, 10, 11 years old, I felt very restricted and very unhappy. My grandmother used to say to me, Maura, I'm going to call you Waterworks. Every time I look at you, you start to cry, which was true. My emotions were very high because I felt a captive in my house and even in my small body. And I could remember there were times I felt like a victim. And when you're a small child, getting from Monday in school to Wednesday to Friday to the weekend, it was like it might as well be forever. And I remember feeling very much like, this isn't the life I want. I want to do this. I want to do that. But I remember making a choice. And I remember thinking, you know what? I don't have so much control over my life now. But I promised myself that I will grow up, even though I was being geared, groomed, etc., for, this future career in law, that I would grow up to be happy and free. And the operative word free meant to be free to be who I am, rather than a construct of maybe expectations.
What you did as a child, when you reflected, is you actually set your core expectation. Your core expectation became happiness, and you're going to live a fulfilling life. I mean, that's what became it. So when you expect something at your core like that, it becomes a reality in your life. It's how you gravitate towards everything.
I agree. And you know what, if I could add to this is really interesting, because I was first child and I wasn't perfect by any means, but I was a people pleaser, parent pleaser, and I was always looking for approval, which always seemed to be elusive, so I was always on to my next thing. But curiously, when I went to college, now I was very grateful. My parents sent me away to Boston College, so I felt very honored. Now, I did not want to be a lawyer. I wasn't really called to that, but they were paying for it. So there I was pre-law. But here you talk about expectations and art. I write about this in my blogs. I speak about it in my podcast. I talk about it when I speak elsewhere, and I have it in my e-course. But here's what I used to do. I would do on the outside what was expected of me. Let's say what family, society, etc. expected of me, but always within me. And you talk about the course, I would find my own ways to pursue things that were of interest to me. I'll tell you one thing, at 12 years old, I told you, couldn't really go out of the house, but I got a book that taught me how to type. I'm really dating myself, right? And I used my grandfather's old legal secretary's old typewriter, taught myself how to type because I knew as a very young child, watching her type out a lot of legal documents, that the power of the written word to get other people to think about new ideas was what I wanted to do. I couldn't even read or write at the time. So here I was at 12 years old one summer buying a book. And when I was indoors, I would teach myself how to type, which of course became a way of making money later on and later helped me. But here's another thing. In college, I had a major in political science. My family was paying for the degree, but I took a second major in Spanish literature because I loved the language. I wanted to travel. And so I always would have the top level of what I was doing to please people. And every bit of excess time I would have, I would sort of pursue those things were of interest to me. And I've done it over the course of my life. And now today I put it together as this international speaker talking about happiness and how do we live fulfilled lives. And I took all my previous life experiences and each one of them somehow have worked together to create what I'm doing, which at some level were the things I imagined as a young child. I wanted to go around the world and meet new friends. I wanted to be like a goodwill ambassador. And here I ended up getting this title from speaking at Nelson Mandela Day as the ambassador of happiness. I was so taken up with leadership and leaders that knew how to create positive cultures of inclusion. And you know who was leader back when I was in kindergarten was JFK. Mm-hmm. And I remember that he would say, ask not what your country could do for you, but ask what you could do for your country. And he was exporting young kids out and he was bringing different people into the White House with music. And guess what I talk about? I talk about leadership, influence. I'm doing it on a global scale and I'm a writer. And so all of these things you talk about intentions, I put them all together and I created it all into what I'm doing today.
Mm-hmm. You know, getting back to what it is, and I want to ask you a question after I make this statement. You know, all is based in our expectations, how we learn to expect. Did you ever have the expectation that this was going to become your reality? Or did you just sit back and say, this is how I'm going to live and keep focused on what I want? Because see, that's the difference. You set your expectation in deciding, making the choice. You were going to let the world see this, but inside you were going to be this way. So when you're true to your core expectations, that's where your life gravitates. When you expect to be something, you actually become it if you will follow the path to it. If you don't let the expectations of others dictate your happiness. So what happens with most people, why they become anxious, depressed, unhappy, unfulfilled, is that they live to the expectations of other people. They do not live to their core expectations. And that's what I address.
You know what? I'm glad you kind of brought this full circle. My husband always refers to my green chair moment. And I thought, oh my gosh, what is that? The green chair moment, I was halfway through law school. After graduating college, I went to law school and I took out student loans to do this. I'm back in New Jersey, really a state I didn't want to live in. I wanted to live in Florida, but I was living with my parents, driving back and forth to Newark, New Jersey, close by Seton Hall Law School. And what I'm doing, you have to kind of put yourself back in that era, Art. I was preparing myself for a 40-year future career in a profession I had no passion for in order to please externals, my family, whatever. And I was midway through and I remember thinking, oh my gosh, I'm getting closer to graduation. I've got to take the bar. Then I'm on this course until I'm old enough to say to everybody, okay, I'm retiring and moving to Florida to do what I want to do. One day, Art, I couldn't get out of a green chair. It was an armchair that had a cushion you could put your feet up, and I would always read my law books there. And I was supposed to be getting up one morning from that chair to drive myself to school. And I was so exhausted emotionally, physically. I couldn't lift myself out of the chair. Didn't go to school that day. My husband came in from work. We were married at the time. And he said to me, "Oh, Maura, weren't you supposed to be at school?" I opened my mouth, Art, and nothing came out. That was my Waterloo moment, because as much as I was a people pleaser, I had reached a point where my body would no longer go in that direction. And I had to leave law school. And then I thought, and this is how it was on the inside. I knew that the light within me of expectation, of purpose, of happiness and joy was diminishing by the day. And one day I was too heavy to pick myself up. And I want to agree with everything you're saying, is that we do need to follow after our expectations. And that was my breaking point, to say, I might have grown up a certain way, but I have to break off of this because I can't go on any further. But here's the thing that I share with people, and it's the way I've continued to live. It's that I literally can feel within myself, whether you could call it an inner smile, like an inner GPS. Am I smiling? Do I feel energized? Am I curious? Am I impassioned? Do I feel like, oh, I want to explore more of this? Which is a good thing. It's the happiness. It's, follow this. Let this be the rudder of life. And at the same time, Art, I can't tell you how many ways and how many times I've used that same internal guide where I'm in something, sounds good, looks good, and my insides, it's like the smile goes down. I feel constricted. It's like my soul of intention is saying, Maura, this is not what you called for. This is not going to bring you to where you want to go. So I've done not wild things, but I've done different things. Like I spent 7 days in a self-pitch tent on 2 islands in Lake Victoria in Africa. And I loved it. It was so totally outside my comfort zone because I knew I was called to do these things. I've been on a missions trip, medical missions, bringing medical supplies to coffee growers in the hills of Honduras. I have worked mentoring girls 14 to 17 in jail. So these are things, it's like, well, what the heck is this? But guess what, Art? My soul likes to connect with people. And yet I find years later that all of these experiences somehow work together for what I do. When I go to other foreign countries and I speak, people know that I carry within me so much. Some people have said, Maura, even if I didn't understand a word you spoke, I knew you understood me. And I literally convey things on a multitude of levels that help other people learn to set their own intentions and expectations after what's important to them from within rather than to the outside world. And I believe at that point, if people follow those kinds of things, positive intentions and the things they're here for that they want to explore, they'd be happier, they'd contribute more to the world, and we would have a better, happier, and more harmonious society.
Sure. You know, you look at a lot of these young kids now that are doing these horrendous acts, you know, like the synagogue in San Diego this past weekend. And, you know, what I wonder about sometimes is, did they become askew because of the expectations of trying to live up to the expectations of others? And they became susceptible to the expectations of others on the negative, really negative side, in the evil side. And then they carry out these things because they don't know their inner self enough, and they don't know who they are and who they can be. And they give up and they lose sight of what a beautiful life this is and what it can present to you. I mean, life is beautiful. When you trust in your inner self and you trust in your gut feelings and you act upon them and you become a doer, and you start doing the things that really mean and matter to you, it becomes so enriching, happy, and all that. But I had another question for you. And this was one you may find really interesting. Where do you think happiness starts? Do you think it starts in the head, which I mean the brain, or the heart, or the soul, even the soul?
That's a great question. Could I answer this another way? Because I think I'll get to the answer.
Absolutely.
And it goes back to childhood. I must have come into this world maybe slightly different. Who knows? I'm left-handed. I would always ask the questions nobody else would. One of my earliest memories is seeing people. Imagine when you're a child, you might not even realize you're in a house known as your body. But I have a very early memory, before like preschool era, of watching people or observing people, adults, trying to get the attention and affirmation from other people around them, really looking for approval. Now, I wouldn't have used those terms in my head because I didn't have the vocabulary. But as a young child, this is what I thought. I wonder why they're doing all of this moving around and all of this activity, trying to get somebody else to like them or to get somebody's attention when all they need to do is to ask themselves, what do I want? What's important? So I, as a very young child, was aware that the soul within already knew the answers. The soul within was already a wise place, a happy place, a harmonized place. But that's why my mantra had become living happy from the inside out. I had to learn. That was an early experience. And to answer your question, I believe that happiness is a state of mind, but it's also a choice. Meaning, and I always tell people, wherever you are, you always have to ask yourself this question, something I learned. Am I seeing myself as a victim? Or am I in a bad world, in a dangerous world, whatever? Or am I seeing myself as a beneficiary in a benevolent universe? This is all from self-practice. That's why I think I'm relatable, because I've lived through these things. And I'll tell you, if I, in any state, and I've had to do this repeatedly in all kinds of environments, if I can first answer that question, am I envisioning or feeling like a victim or like a beneficiary? If I can answer to the latter, I'm a beneficiary in a benevolent universe, I literally feel emotionally after making that decision, okay? I then feel emotionally in a much better place. Therefore, my expectations change, and then things happen in life, maybe not in that very moment, but I'm literally opening myself to all good possibilities and good outcomes. And I'm telling you this, Art, I won't tell you my life has always been easy, but I will say this, that by choosing that path of being a beneficiary, forgiving myself, forgiving others, forgiving situations, and expecting something better, guess what? I could look back and I'm like, even the bad stuff worked out for good.
Has anyone ever inspired you to discover a happier, healthier, and more fulfilled you? It is a magical experience, isn't it? Inspiration is indeed very powerful, yet it's often undermined. It can lift you from the ground to the sky in no time. Have you ever thought about returning the favor by inspiring the people around you? If you don't think you have it in you, we have good news for you. Art Costello's online course has everything you need to learn to supercharge yourself and shape your character into a powerful personality. Get ready to discover your strengths and unleash the creativity within. Don't believe it? Check it out yourself by signing up for this life-changing course at expectationacademy.com. That's expectationacademy.com.
I couldn't agree with you more. I just frame it a little bit different. When I was younger, I learned that everything for me was about learning new experiences. So every event in my life and everything that I've ever done, I've never looked at it as a disappointment or a challenge or anything. I mean, through death of friends and through death of my wife to cancer in 2006, everything that happens to us is meant to teach us a lesson. It becomes a learning experience. And if you will change your mindset to think about everything as a learning experience and take that victimization away from it and make it malevolent, like you said, then you gain so much knowledge out of it that you cannot fail because you learn. Nothing is a failure. Because as long as you're learning from something, how can you ever look at something you're learning as a failure? So through everything that has ever happened to me that has been on the negative side, I have always looked at it as being a teaching moment. And it is teaching me a lesson, not only to learn sometimes not to handle it, but sometimes learning how to handle it and how to make good use of it. I mean, learning comes in very different forms. It's not about, everything going into your head to register for some event down the road. Sometimes it's just becomes something that you learn that becomes part of who you are and how you react. Because, excuse my French, but shit happens all the time. And what makes the difference in us all is how we react to it and what we take from it. So that's my take on that.
Let me say, as I'm listening to you, you must have been a highly evolved soul from when you came into the world. Because you know what I'm saying? You knew from early on it's a learning experience. I will tell you where I was, as much as I came into the world with very high expectations, meaning that I didn't see any limitation. I spent several years feeling very much like the victim, feeling very unhappy, as I shared. So I had to learn at age 9, 10, 11, I didn't like the way I was feeling. So I had to teach myself to think anew. But beyond that, it worked out to my advantage as well, because I can so understand people who are brought up in an environment where things are skewed in a certain way, and I can use my previous experience to relate to and then also give them some of those tools. But you must have come in as one highly evolved soul.
Let me tell you how it started, because, and I hope the audience doesn't get tired of hearing this story, but when I was 9 years old and feeling so lonely and abandoned after my parents moved us to a farm where there was no neighbors within miles, and the one that I did have were in their 90s. So I had lost baseball and everything. I went to the top of a mountain by our house, laid on my back and had a conversation with God. And I heard this voice that all you have to do is be patient. Just be patient and everything will come to you. And I took that lesson, and it has become who I am all of my life, and got me through Vietnam as a Marine in combat. It got me through 35 years of owning my own business. And then in 2006, losing my wife to ovarian cancer. And it has always been with me, because when I lost my wife, I realized that expectations are what has always kept me going. And I actually believe that the one gift that God gives every single man, woman, and child, regardless of your color, your gender, no matter what you are, is the seed of expectation, and it is the seed from which we grow. And we grow by asking questions and making choices and all of those things. And I think that science has proved it. You know, if you look at child psychology and sociology and all that, it's a fact. We grow through our expectations, but yet when we hear the word expectation, people cringe. They cringe. They think negative.
Really?
Oh, yes.
And I think that's such a great thing, because that's what gives us hope, right?
There's the other part of it, hope. It does give you hope, and it gives you faith, because we look at our expectations only through two lenses: fear, which stops, and faith, which moves you forward. Faith not always being about religion, faith being in yourself, in a mentor, a coach, a spouse, a parent, can be in any number of forms. The greatest faith you can have is faith in yourself, in the knowledge and faith that no matter what happens to you, you are always going to be okay. It's always going to be all right, no matter what happens. It's how you perceive and how you look at it. That's what makes the difference in us.
You know what? I totally agree. And that is really, I would say, the undercurrent of life and the expectation of life. I really believe there are many people, young people as well today, not just middle-aged and older people, who don't live. They're like the walking dead. Okay. You brought something up. I'm so glad you did. Did you say you were 9 years old on the top of the hill?
Yep, 9 years old.
Listen to my story. And I'm going to share this with you, and I'm going to say this has played an enormous role in my life. When I was 9 years old, did you grow up Catholic? If you were Irish, you had to grow up Catholic.
I grew up Catholic.
All right. So growing up, you know, I grew up in a Catholic family. I started out at Catholic school. I wouldn't say my family was super religious, but I grew up very aware of authority. So what was the Catholic Church? It represented God. Now, I always sensed, and this was really thankfully to my grandfather, the late attorney, I actually sensed from him this presence of what was good and trustworthy and equal in all things, and looked at everyone equally and treated everyone the same. And I thought, I know the man's just a man, but whatever he oozed from his life, I understood that there are certain characteristics that I would attribute to, let's say, an unseen Father God in heaven. Okay, that's childlike faith, right? But, all right, so he passed away, I was 5.5. When I was 8 or 9, they had Vatican II, and suddenly they changed the rules in the Catholic faith. Now, I want you to think about this. As a young child, I just naturally trusted in an unseen God, unseen heaven, unseen benevolence, right? trustworthiness. When they changed those rules, meaning it was suddenly okay to eat meat on Fridays, you could go to communion if you had breakfast, as long as you waited an hour, but before that, people who are not Catholic and not old wouldn't know this stuff. Here's how it affected me. Art, this is pretty crazy, but I'm going to tell you, this was an unbelievable moment for me, because all of a sudden, the unseen world upon which I trusted, the power of God, the awareness of a father, a benevolent, unseen father that was watching over the world and all of us, all of a sudden changed the rules. Well, I remember asking priests, nuns, CCD teachers, parents, and I was like, why did God change the rules? Why are some people burning in purgatory because they ate meat on Friday and didn't get to confess it, and now it's okay? And I actually had this picture like, oh my gosh, is God mean? Does he laugh like, ha, 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 gotcha? And I thought, what kind of a father would do this to his kids and treat them independent of one another and change the rules? And listen to this. It knocked my life off its axis. And here I am feeling totally alone. Nobody understood. Nobody processed that change the way I did. And one day I was around 9 years old. I'm walking across, I think I was in public school, but probably walking to CCD class. I had my knee socks on, holding my books, a couple of girlfriends with me. And all of a sudden, a voice went through my body. And this is what it said: I never change. And you know what? I didn't even know that was a Bible verse until my 30s or whatever. But Art, guess what? That voice so stabilized me again. It was as if nobody else understood where I was living, but the voice of God knew exactly where I was. And in that one response of, I never change, my character, my presence, my wisdom, my intentions never change, that Art, that leveled me off. All of a sudden, my emotions were fine. And you know something? Because I knew of that voice, that's part of what has always been my guiding sense. And it's not religious. It's not, because trust me, I've been in and out of it. But I've learned to trust in the benevolence and the wisdom and the knowledge of that. There's something in there that has been my guide, that even when I can't see things good, I know what I know. So there you go. And I know it'll all be good.
It's called faith.
Yeah.
It's what it's called, faith. You know, believing in something that you can't see, and believing in its benevolence and its goodness.
And trust, right. And trusting
it
in the long-term outcome.
Mm-hmm.
So see, that's, but funny, 9 years old.
Yeah.
But it told me that too, having that in my life and constantly going back there, it also became something of an anchor for me, that if the outside world was telling me one thing and I was getting, let's say, a different kind of a message, even though it requires faith, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I would follow after that internal voice rather than going after what the world was telling me was, should make you happy. This should make you successful. Couldn't do.
That's it. I preach it a lot about listening to your internal voice, because it's there. And, you know, in my experience, it's never failed me. I have failed it sometimes, but it has never failed me. And that's why some people end up saying, I should have listened to myself, you know, because they challenge it and do something that is not conducive to what is going on, the voice inside of them. That voice, you know, I can't tell you the number of times in Vietnam and in automobiles and everything else where my inner voice says, you know, hey, stop right here, make a turn, do that, and then something will happen. You know, particularly in Vietnam, it was really strong, you know, living by that. But, you know, I was telling somebody the other day about an experience I had in Austin. There's an intersection, it's a T-bone intersection, and I was coming down the long straight end of it, and at the end is a stop sign, and I stopped at the stop sign and I started to proceed through, and all of a sudden a van came through, failed to stop at the other stop sign, and was literally millimeters away from my front bumper on my car. If he would have hit me, or I had gone 1 minute sooner, I'd be gone. I mean, there was no way that I could have taken that impact to the side of a car like that. But anyway, but it just goes to show when you, I don't know what made me stop and just, there was something that said, just stop and look left. And I saw them just break the knoll of the hill. It was a blind hill. And I said, they're not going to stop. And I hit the brakes and they went, and I saw the look on the woman's face in the passenger side of the car. And I could see her just going, you know, like that. But golly, it's, when we listen to that inner self, it will never, ever fail us. I just believe that you have to listen to it.
See, I do too. And I think that's a big disconnect we have in society. We are all programmed to conform to outside messages. Today, maybe more than ever, because, I used to blame it on Madison Avenue, TV, magazines. Today, it's on our iPhones. It's everywhere. And you know what I never realized, Art? Although as much, I guess, because my life was one of living happy from the inside out and having to always go within and get my soul's perspective or spirit or God, whatever, and kind of always follow that internal
compass.
Rudder. Yeah, exactly. Toward happiness, toward the freedom to be me and a purpose, whatever you want to call it. But I never realized, and I guess this all comes from, like life learnings. I literally never realized how many people do not listen to the internal voice. And what they do is they separate, they forget or deny that internal person, and then they become a fragment of their real self. They're distanced from their real self. That's when they get into all kinds of bad behaviors. They don't even know who they are. And that's sometimes when people get into, overusing drugs or overbuying or getting themselves into places where they're so unhappy or sick. And I feel so strongly that if we could unify ourselves and follow our internal leadings and learn how to exercise them on the outside, our bodies and our whatever it is that we're doing, that not only would we feel more at home and at peace and at harmony, but then we would be telegraphing that kind of a life outwardly so other people would get the message, yes, be a harmonized person rather than someone who is running after the tail of everybody else who also doesn't know where they're going. Because I always like to say, if the human race knew where it was going, wouldn't we have arrived by now? We still struggle with people that are competing in the wrong ways. They're stealing from each other. They're running after things that don't even make them happy, rather than looking to harmonize with that internal voice and being a unified person.
It makes you complete. You complete yourself. You complete yourself.
Yeah,
you don't need
right.
somebody else to complete you. You complete yourself. Why do you think so many marriages break up? Because you're living to the expectations of your spouse and you think you can change people and you can't. You can't.
And it's a no-win. It's a no-win. And frustrating.
You become so unhappy that your life is miserable, and then you make your children's life miserable. You make your husband's life, or your wife makes, either way around you want to do it. Everybody becomes miserable, and they stop living to their true authenticity.
Exactly. And we end up with an overall society like that. And so that lack of harmony shows up everywhere. Fighting, negative competition, backbiting, stealing, profiteering in bad ways. And to me, I don't want to say it's quite simple, but I know there's a path to get there. And so I look at a society, again, because I've had several decades to observe, we may have become a really supposedly highly educated society. We're advanced in all kinds of technology, but unfortunately, the humanness in us has not advanced at the same rate. And I feel like, we'd be almost better if we were better humans rather than having faster internet service. You know what I'm saying? Not that I want to debunk any of it, but hey, we'd have a lot fewer wars.
And hopefully because of the sharing that people like you and I are doing with this world, hopefully one of these days people will see exactly what life can be. I told on a podcast I did the other day, one of my things was that I said, when I die, I'm going to be 72 in August. And when I die, one thing I can die saying is that I have done everything in my life that I ever wanted to do. And I've done it happily and with the best of vigor. I mean, everything has just always been the perfect life for me. And
that's so beautiful. It's so beautiful. And then people feel that when they're around people like that, or at least maybe I can, those are the kind of relationships I like, because there's something that is reciprocal. There's a good energy that comes out of it. I love that. But interesting now, Art, you said you're going to be 72 this summer. I'm now 61. So here's what I actually remember. You want to talk about intentions? I always knew I was called to do something of an influential nature on an international scale. But here's I won't say crazy, but I'm going to say a knowing thing. I knew at 20, 30, 40, I didn't have sufficient life experience, but there was more to it. We just talked about spirituality. I'm telling you, when I was younger, even in college, I would keep my awarenesses to myself because I knew if I opened up my mouth, people would be like, what the heck kind of an idea is that? Something has happened in the last few years where people of every age are now looking at things through a different set of eyes, and they're open to new ideas that previously they would have, I don't want to say they would have wanted to lock you up for it, but I was, you know what it was? I was not orthodox in my thinking. And now people today are much more free to share maybe ideas that people intuitively knew, but had been so suppressed and so oppressed by orthodoxy. And something's happening. And this is not just in our country, it's other places as well. But I'm telling you, I would have loved to be in a society years ago that could talk this way, but today it's not a big deal. And I think that in itself, though, is progress.
Yeah, it is. And sometimes I think that we're evolving for the better, but sometimes I think that looking back on things, and I think that age has given me more perspective and more knowledge because I'm using everything as a learning experience. I've gained so much more knowledge, and I agree with you. I couldn't do 15 years ago what I'm doing now. I would have never dreamt that I'm doing this. It was only after I lost my wife that I really found, I knew, I had the same feelings you did, that I knew that there was greatness because I knew that from 9 years old, that there was something out there for me that was beyond my control. I just had to understand it to get to the point where the good Lord would use it for his purpose. And that's why I think that God has put me here on earth to teach the power of expectation, because it can change lives for the better. And with that being said, I want to give the audience time. I want to give you the time. I want to give the audience the knowledge of where they can get a hold of you, how they can get a hold of you, because believe it or not, we've been on this over an hour. And, but I can promise you this, we will do this again. We will do this.
Next time I'll interview you. I like that.
Yeah, that'll work.
All right. Well, you know what? And it's funny, when you were talking about when you leave this earth, I thought that's a perfect segue into the close of this interview, because I once had that thought, and I was riding my bike through a cemetery one day, and I was looking at, the headstones, and I thought, how do I want to be remembered? And you know what I came up with? 2 words: she loved. That's it. When I'm gone, I don't even care if they don't know my name, but imagine being able to be a vessel and a vehicle and the very presence that people can feel and relate to of love. Is that not it? That's good. So that's what I wanted to say. But beyond that, go ahead.
Yep. I want to know where they can get a hold of you. I want the people to know what you're doing next and where they can get a hold of you, and what social media platforms you're on, all your basic info.
Okay. If they like podcasts, Maura Sweeney, Living Happy Inside Out. Maura Sweeney, Living Happy Inside Out podcast. They'll enjoy a lot of the questions and the stories and the calls to action. But otherwise, connect with me and subscribe to me at maura4u.com, MAURA, the number 4, the letter U.com. And I have stories, I have videos, I have books, and I'm also a public speaker. And my next place I'll be going, 2 months ago, I was in Tunisia. I just found out this morning I'll be speaking in Manchester, England, and then probably several other countries this summer. But anyone who needs an inspirational speaker to help people get unstuck and to really grow from the inside out, write to me, Maura at mauraforyou.com.
That's great. Shower Epiphany audience, this has been great. Maura Sweeney, it has been a pleasure. And again, I made a friend for life, and I can't say anything more than, love is what makes us bind together. And we have so much in common, not only where we grew up, but how we grew up and all that. So this has really been a pleasure. So with that being said, folks, I want to tell you goodbye. You can get a hold of me at expectationtherapy.com. I'm on all social media. And Heather White, you can take us away.
Don't know which direction you want your life to take? Are you sinking deep down into the pit of uncertainties day by day? So, what's the secret to leading a happy, satisfied life? It's taking matters into your own hands. But what if the matters in question are a total blur? Art Costello's Expectation Academy course aims to tell you exactly how you can get some clarity in your life. This course can be your savior on your journey to reinventing yourself. While you certainly can't plan your whole future ahead, you can definitely control twists and turns your life takes. So what are you waiting for? Sign up for this course now at expectationacademy.com. Get a chance to broaden your horizons and add meaning to your life. That's expectationacademy.com. Thanks for listening to the show. Drop us your comments and questions with what you want answered on the show. You can subscribe on iTunes and Binge Network. You can also get more information on the website, expectationtherapy.com.